You are watching Trinity Channel.
Hi, I'm Don Deal. I'm the host here at ABNSET's Trinity Channel show, Spiritual Warfare. Today's show, we're going to be discussing UFOs. It's been in the news a lot. It's an entertainment. It's pretty much everywhere. So we're going to talk about UFOs and some of the things that, as believers, and also for anyone who's a non-believer, maybe there's things they haven't thought about, or maybe there's things that they need to know about the topic that they haven't heard before. So first, I'd like to introduce my guest. I have specially here today Dr. Casey Luskin. Casey, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Don. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm very pleased to have you here today. For those who don't know Casey, he's the Associate Director of the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute. He holds a PhD in geology from the University of Johannesburg and a BS and MS degrees in earth sciences from the University of California, San Diego. In addition, he has a law degree from the University of San Diego. Dr. Luskin has been a California-based attorney since 2005. So the first impression I'm getting, Casey, is that you kind of lazed and laid around throughout college and education. You just couldn't figure out what you wanted to do.
Well, the way my dad always puts it is I put too much time in school and I should have just been a plumber, and he's probably right about that. So
well, yeah, we're definitely considering that for our video trapped college students in our household. The second guest is a frequent guest here, and call him a guest, call him a co-host, call him Dr. Danny. It's Dr. Danny Burnham, the pastor of First Baptist Church, Titusville. Welcome back, Danny.
Thank you for having me, Don. Just don't call me late for dinner.
You know, for those who don't know, Danny has a doctor of ministry degree from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, one of the top 10 seminaries in the southern part of the U.S. and he has the difficulty of being my pastor at the same time. So we're talking about UFOs today. Why are we talking about UFOs today? Well, in 2023, the House Oversight Committee had a hearing in which they had former intelligence officer David Grush and military pilots testified about UAPs. And November of 2024, a subcommittee on national security in the U.S. hosted a hearing titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. And when I read the title, I always thought it was unidentified aerial phenomena, but I guess it's anomalous. And I bet Casey knows why. Exposing the trail, he does know why. Good. To investigate classified programs and alleged government cover-ups. Let's see. Recently, they had a bipartisan committee hearing in 2026 this year, May, and in June 9th, that's last week. They had a Capitol Hill action spearheaded by the House Oversight Committee on UAP Caucus. In addition to all this government activity and all these files being released, the movie Disclosure Day by the incredibly successful director and producer Steven Spielberg came out last week. And he has said many times that he sees a great impact of the idea of UFOs on religious believers and all people on earth. So we're going to kind of get in a little of that. Casey, let me ask you this. Why do you think so many people assume that the discovery of extraterrestrial life would somehow disprove Christianity? And number two, what is a UAP? Why is it anomalous?
Let's start with number two first. So yeah, I actually also thought that it was unidentified aerial phenomena. That's like the new term for UFOs, but it's unidentified anomalous phenomena. And the reason why it's anomalous is they're saying that these craft, whatever they are, they're not always aerial. Sometimes they actually go underwater. And that's one of the interesting things that's been cited about these crafts is they'll be flying through the air and then they'll dip below the surface of the water. And the claim that's being made is that they don't even lose speed when they do this. They can basically, it's what's called being transmedium. They can go from water to air and back again without losing any speed and really having no effect on the trajectory or the speed of the craft. And so that's something that has been cited by these folks who are into this stuff. And so it's called anomalous rather than aerial. But in any case, why have folks claimed that UFOs or the existence of alien life, which by the way, I'm agnostic about the existence of physical extraterrestrial life. I'm agnostic actually that what the government has been releasing really shows that these are ETs, or, I don't know what it's showing. But I will say that it's interesting and it's something worth talking about. I think the argument that's being made basically is that people think that somehow religion has no way to accommodate the existence of extraterrestrial life if it were shown to exist. And so somehow this would refute religion. Somehow religious people have no room within their theology for the possibility that God could have made life elsewhere. I don't see why that has to be the case. I'm sure we can talk about this. But the argument also is that if life exists elsewhere, that somehow this is proof of evolution. Okay. And the argument basically goes like this, that life evolved and arose and evolved through natural, unguided, materialistic evolutionary mechanisms on Earth. Okay. So the argument then says, well, we live in this vast, grand universe. So if you get the right conditions elsewhere, then life should arise and evolve through natural chemical reactions on other planets, just like it did here on Earth. And so they will actually sort of use this, I would say, retroactive logic to say, okay, well, if these UFOs are real, if extraterrestrial alien life is real, that's proof that life evolved and arose naturally elsewhere in the universe, which sort of, through this backwards logic proves that life arose and evolved naturally here on Earth. I think there's a lot of problems with that argument, with that logic. We can get into that, Don, but that's the basic reason that I think people are saying that somehow ET life would prove that life evolved on Earth and disprove the existence of God, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting. Danny, would an actual ET showing up on Earth, would that disprove Christianity and the Bible?
I really don't see how it could, because the Bible doesn't specifically speak to extraterrestrial life or life on other planets. The Bible primarily deals with life on this planet. So there's nothing in Scripture that definitively says there is or definitively says there isn't. I'm going to have to adopt Casey's position, and I probably have always been this way. I've just never given it enough thought to label myself. But yeah, I would have to be agnostic on the subject. If it occurred, then okay, we find out there's life on other planets. If it doesn't, we don't find out. I would go, so I think that's right along the same level of finding out that the Earth wasn't flat, or that the Earth is not the center of the universe. I think so often we tried to mix religion and science in ways that are probably not healthy. And then when some type of scientific breakthrough happens or something occurs, the people who discover these things are labeled as heretics. Again, just go back to when we discovered that the Earth was round and wasn't flat. Oh, the horror! Or that the sun revolves around the Earth revolves around the sun as opposed to the opposite. But again, the Bible really doesn't speak to those. Again, particularly as this conversation goes to extraterrestrial life. So if it occurs, it has not. I mean, it doesn't disprove or prove the existence of God or Jesus as his son.
Interestingly, in the 1940s or 30s, C.S. Lewis wrote a science fiction trilogy, and in it, a traveler from the Earth discovers life on another planet, except the advanced life there had never fallen. And so he kind of came up with this idea of, well, what if? And that was quite an interesting thing. For me personally, what has influenced my thinking, when I was in high school, I read a book, We Are Not Alone by Walter Sullivan. It came out in the 1960s, in which he discussed the possibility of extraterrestrial life. It didn't sound particularly enthusiastic about the idea, but once again, they did the incredible odds of trillions of planets and galaxies, etc. Therefore, there has to be kind of argument. To me, that's kind of like saying 2 + 2 could equal 5 if you tried a few trillion times, but we haven't tried it a few trillion times yet. So perhaps it'll work. And then later in this millennia, I read a book called Rare Earth, Why Complex Life is Uncommon in the Universe by Donald Brownlee and Peter Douglas Ward. And those guys aren't religious believers, but they're scientists, and they said that the odds of any advanced life forming on any planet anywhere in the universe is exceptionally small, ridiculously small. So you don't have to be a Christian to believe that life probably doesn't exist in the universe. But if it does, I also agree with both of you. I don't see how. I'm a Christian. I don't see how, in what way it would affect my faith. It would be interesting, but apparently the movie by Spielberg is kind of saying that people filter everything through their religious organizations, and how that organization handles the information would be how you would handle it.
Well, and kind of going back to your question, Don, and I'm sure Casey has certainly got thoughts on this. Yeah, how much of our thoughts are influenced by movies?
Mhm.
And from my perspective, I think a lot of people would look at the proof of extraterrestrial life as being affirmation that, again, let's go back, and again, we're in Casey's area of expertise, but we look at the world, and clearly the idea of an unguided evolution just doesn't seem to fit with the world in which we live. The way human beings have been designed, and the way the world is so carefully designed. So science is, to a degree, at a loss to explain all of this, other than just statistical random chance. But if we bring in aliens, or if we bring in extraterrestrial life, then the assumption is, oh, well, they were here before us, and they were the ones that guided this. So that way we're able to say, okay, yes, there was a more intelligent being than us, but we're not going to have to subscribe to God. So I want to say that there's probably some of that in this belief that if we find out that there is life on other planets, that automatically disproves God. But I think that's a false equivalency. I don't think the two have anything to do with each other, beyond, if you've seen Prometheus, beyond what Hollywood has told us. But because the entertainment industry shapes so much of what we like to believe or what we like to think about, I would say that to a degree factors in there as well.
Yeah, I absolutely. Danny, you describe yourself as agnostic about the existence of alien life. You just said so. You seem to hold that Christians should keep an open mind on this question. Why would you say that?
Well, again, let's go back. Just as I said earlier about the Earth being round and not the center of the universe. If we allow Scripture to shape our thoughts, and Scripture doesn't clearly teach us that there is life on other planets or not, then I don't know that we can afford, without there being proof, solid proof one way or the other beyond that, I think we should allow ourselves to, again, back to the question, if life exists on other planets, does that disprove God? And the answer is no, clearly. It just does not. Now, it certainly opens up a whole world of other questions, but it doesn't disprove God. So I don't know why Christians should be intimidated by the possibility. And I think sometimes you and I, Don, have had this conversation a number of times. One of the things I think we're probably most guilty of in the Christian faith, particularly here in the United States, is that we're not nearly as thoughtful about our faith, and we don't consider things and discuss things and work through them quite often. In fact, in the church, quite often we discourage discussion, and I think that's the worst thing in the world. If we're supposed to love the Lord with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength, I think we should be open to at least discuss anything.
Well, Casey, although of course you are a Christian, but you're also a scientist. What advice would you give Christians about the question of extraterrestrials? Would it negatively affect the Christian religion and their faith, or what would you say to them, Casey?
Yeah, I agree very much with what Danny is saying. when you look at the Bible, I don't see it saying that God did or did not create extraterrestrial life. The Bible isn't necessarily meant to answer every single question that we might have in life. And that's okay. Actually, it's a very good thing. What it shows is that as Christians, we have freedom to follow the evidence on questions like this. If the evidence shows that there is no extraterrestrial life or that there is extraterrestrial life, we can be free to follow the evidence. And we can also be free to follow the evidence that says, look, if extraterrestrial life does exist, there's no way that it arose through a blind, natural, evolutionary process. It must have been intelligently designed. Back to the movie Disclosure Day. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I did go see it last Friday. And, I was expecting the movie to be very anti-religious based upon a lot of the sort of hype. I think Steven Spielberg was out there giving interviews saying, this movie is going to upend all established order and, kind of overturn people's worldviews and their religious belief. And look, I'm a big fan of Spielberg movies. I mean, who isn't? We all loved Raiders of the Lost Ark. I loved some of his old UFO movies like E.T. or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, War of the Worlds. I mean, he's been like one of the best movie producers on UFOs. So I went into this movie with very high expectations, but I was also expecting it was going to be really challenging to challenging to my faith, but I thought it was going to really push back on people's religious faith. I was pleasantly surprised. I have to say, the bad guys in the movie Disclosure Day, Don and Danny, they were not the church. They were not religious people. It was actually the U.S. government. The U.S. government is definitely, if there's any like sort of organized, established, authority out there that the movie goes against, it's the U.S. government. It's not the religion or the church. The U.S. government in the movie has been hiding evidence of UFOs from society for decades. They're definitely the bad guys in the movie. The church is actually portrayed as very thoughtful. There are some nuns in the movie. I don't want to spoil it too much, who are portrayed as very open-minded and kind of, I would say they would probably agree with a lot of what we're saying in this conversation right now. So the church is definitely not portrayed as the bad guy. Now, there are some twists in the movie without revealing too much or spoiling it too much, where some people want to kind of treat the aliens or the people who have been affected by aliens almost like they are gods. And it shows the tendency that some people might have to worship alien entities as gods or deities if they were ever revealed on Earth. And I think that is something that might be a realistic possibility. I don't believe that that UFOs or alien entities have actually been established as being real from the evidence that's been revealed in the real world so far. But I think that if it did happen, people might be inclined to treat them like substitute gods, substitute entities that, are replacing God. So that is certainly a conversation worth having. But again, I don't see any reason why that has to be the case. God, again, if aliens did exist, there's no way that they evolved through blind, unguided processes. And if I can sound off here for one more minute.
Sure.
A lot of times when you start to make these arguments, people will say, well, we don't really know what alien life would be like. Maybe it's not anything like life as we know it. Okay. Here's my take on that. No matter what, whether alien life, if it exists, whether it is like life on Earth or something different, we know one thing about life. Life requires a very high order and high energy state. Okay. All life is, whether it's life exactly like life on Earth or something different, it's going to be a very high order state of matter and a very high energy state of matter. And the interesting thing about everything we know about chemistry, this is like chemistry 101, is that chemical reactions, blind chemical reactions, they can produce high ordered states that are not high energy or high energy states that are not high order. But chemical reactions never produce states of matter that are both high energy and high order at the same time. Let me give you a couple examples. Things like volcanoes or hurricanes, those would be high energy states, but they're very chaotic. They're very disordered, okay? Or something like a crystal in a rock. Crystals are very, very high order, but they're very, very low energy, okay? So the only way that we can get what we see in life, both high order and high energy states of matter, is literally through our cells using molecular machines that can harness energy from the environment and use it to build these high energy, high order states of matter that we see in living cells. And what's amazing about molecular machines is we have no experience with random blind chemical reactions producing machines. Okay. So how do our cells get these molecular machines? They do it through information that is encoded in our DNA. They build the parts of these machines through instructions that are literally encoded in our DNA, in our cells. Okay. So again, none of this kind of stuff arises through blind evolutionary mechanisms. In our experience, when we see information and information processing in machines, that only comes back from an intelligent cause. Only intelligent agents can create and generate information and machine-like structures. So the point of all this is to say that we can have very, very strong, sound arguments from everything we know about chemistry and biology that in our experience, if extraterrestrial life exists, it was not the result of random, blind evolutionary mechanisms. It had to have been intelligently designed. And that's why, if people are inclined to worship the aliens, well, what about those aliens? Where did they come from? How did they arise at their highly complicated states? It always is going to require us tracing back to a mind and intelligence that did not evolve. And in my view, that's who we would talk about being God.
Interesting, but I'm thinking about what the atheists or the materialists or the evolutionists would say. I would think they would push back and say to you, aren't you begging the question that it didn't happen naturally?
Well, everything we know about what natural mechanisms can do tells us that natural mechanisms do not produce things like information-rich molecules and machines. Okay, we have zero experience with natural evolutionary mechanisms producing language-based code, information like what we see in our DNA, and machines. And all of our experience, whenever we know the origin of information, language-based code, and machines, it always traces back to a mind or an intelligent agent. So for that reason, if we want to go off of what experience shows, and that's what science is supposed to be based upon, there's no way it's going to come from blind evolutionary mechanisms. It's going to require an intelligent cause.
One of your cohorts, Doug X, didn't he do his research on the possibility of proteins creating information or something? I remember vaguely something along that line.
Yeah, great question, Don. So Doug Axe is a protein scientist. And what he looked at is the amino acids that are in proteins. And what he found is that, so basically a protein is a long chain of amino acids that then gets folded up into a very particular shape to do a very special and important job inside of your cells. Okay, a lot of these molecular machines, they are made of proteins. And what Doug Axe found is that if you don't have exactly the right order of amino acids, then those proteins will never be able to work properly. They will never be able to fold up into these very special shapes to do very special jobs inside of your cells. And in fact, what he found is that for a typical protein, the likelihood of a sequence of amino acids giving you a functional protein is less than 1 in 10 to the 77th power. Basically, less than 1 in 10 to the 77th sequences of amino acids is going to give you a functional protein for a protein of very typical complexity. Okay. That kind of odds, those kinds of odds, that kind of unlikelihood is never going to arise through blind evolutionary chance-based mechanisms. You're going to have an intelligent cause to generate that kind of information to get a protein, just a simple protein that works properly. So again, what this is showing us is that, and again, proteins are what make up these molecular machines. So you're never going to get these molecular machines by chance alone. In our experience, when we see ordered information like what we see in proteins, it always comes from a mind or a personal agent.
I would tell the audience, to anyone listening, go to YouTube, put in the search term molecular machines, and see what Casey's talking about. It is mind-blowing what is going on inside our cells to watch molecules walking step by step through your cell. It blew my mind the first time I saw it. Casey, I have a friend. He's a doctor, and he was a member of another religion, and then he left that religion, and now he's not really clear but he thinks that he's got a very good case that life was placed on Earth by a form of directed panspermia. For those who don't know, there's panspermia, which means that the building blocks are the actual initial cells floated through the universe till they landed on Earth. Directed panspermia means that an alien life form put them here. So one form says it happened accidentally, and all you would need is about a 20 square mile meteor with one cell in the center of it to protect it from all the radiation in between solar systems, which not very likely. But the directed panspermia, the idea is that an alien planted it here, just as Danny talked about the movie that had that as the premise. What was that movie called again, Danny?
Or Prometheus?
Yeah, Prometheus. Yeah, with the alien plants life here. So his argument, Danny, was that the sheer size of the universe makes alien life inevitable. Why do you think that argument's not as strong as it should be? Let me ask this to Casey first. Casey, why do you think that argument's not as strong as it first appears?
Kind of the argument that people will say, oh, the universe is so big and so vast, therefore alien life must exist, right? We've all heard that argument. In fact, the movie Disclosure Day makes that argument. I remember I first heard that argument when I watched the movie Contact as a college student back in the 90s. And they said, oh, the universe is so big. If it's just us, then it's an awful waste of space. Okay, so what is wrong with that argument? Well, first of all, that argument has evolutionary assumptions embedded in it. It assumes that life arose and evolved naturally on Earth, and therefore, if life exists elsewhere, then if you just get the right conditions somewhere else, life will arise and evolve through natural evolutionary mechanisms. And as we've been talking about, there's no evidence that life can arise through blind and unguided chemical processes. Life always requires intelligence. Life is full of information and machines, and in our experience, those kinds of things only arise from an intelligent cause. We have no experience with blind chemistry producing information in machines, okay? So if the universe is big and huge, that's fine. But that does not mean that therefore life is going to just evolve naturally whenever the conditions are right. Life doesn't evolve naturally. If life exists elsewhere in the universe, it had to have been intelligently designed. Now, what's interesting, Don, is sometimes people will put a theological spin on this, and they will say, well, and Danny, I'd love to hear your take on this, but they'll say, if we're the only beings in the universe, then why did God make this huge giant universe? Wouldn't, God want there to be life elsewhere in the universe? And my response to that is, well, maybe, God can do whatever he wants. I'm not here to tell God what he can or cannot do. If God wants to make life elsewhere in the universe, he can certainly do that. However, the vastness of the universe does not therefore dictate that God is obligated to fill it up with life, okay? Maybe the reason that God made this big, vast, beautiful universe is not simply so he could fill it up with life, but so he could declare his glory. And I think of Psalm 19, which says that the heavens declare the glory of God. Maybe one reason that God made this amazing, vast universe is simply to show, his other creations, us, other beings that he made, that he is an amazing God. He's an incredible, creator who made this vast, beautiful universe. So again, is God obligated to fill up a vast universe with life? No, he could do that if he wanted, but maybe the reason for the big universe we live in is simply for God to display his glory. So I don't think that there's any argument from the size of the universe that requires the universe to therefore be full of life.
Danny, do you agree with him?
Absolutely. Of course, I've always thought that it's dangerous when we begin to try to ascribe reasoning, or not that God is unreasonable, but when we try to impose our sense of logic on a being who is immense enough and powerful enough and omniscient enough to have created all else. Keeping in mind, it's kind of like I've often used the analogy of a preschooler trying to explain calculus. God is so much bigger than what we do. So, the question, why would God create a universe that is this immense and not put life somewhere else? I don't know. What Casey said is absolutely true, and I certainly could find no biblical fault with that. Can I say for a fact that that's the reason, that was his thinking in doing it? No, I can't. But what I can say is, yes, he is an awesome, And I, kind of go back to this, and I'm thinking about this as Casey's talking about it. We were privileged enough to be at the Artemis when Artemis rolled out here in Titusville. And Joe, one of our deacons here at the church, I was walking up to the rocket, and as close as we could get. And of course, this is a huge rocket. And, we're looking at this and I'm thinking, and we're talking to Joe. So we've got all of this technology that we have put together so that we can launch 4 people into space so that they can circle the moon and come back. And then the hope is to eventually send some people to Mars, which is the next closest planet in our solar system, which in the grand scheme of things is really not that far. In our galaxy, which is really not that big compared. And then when you compare all of it, and then I made the comment to Joe, I said, and God's bigger than that. And then Joe's comment to me was, it was one of those profound moments. And Joe said, yes, and he considers us. So does the glory of the universe, or the size of the universe, the vastness of it, the complexity of it, the miracle of it proclaim his glory? Absolutely. But at the same time, then to know that a God that is so all-powerful, so magnificent, so glorious, would consider us is an unbelievably humbling thing. But as we're having this discussion, I can't help but think, for those who are going back to the original question, would the existence of aliens or existence of extraterrestrial life prove or disprove God? I just feel like it's an attempt to bring Romans 1 to life. Scripture says that God has made himself apparent through creation. And Casey just listed a whole long argument and just barely scratched the surface of the number of different ways that you can look at creation and know that there has to be a God that created all of this, because it couldn't possibly have happened by random accident. And I think that, again, at a sinful level, because we are all sinful creatures, the idea that there is a God is a terrifying thing, because not only can we know from creation that God exists, we can also know from creation that we are separated from that God from our actions. So if we can somehow or another interject another natural explanation for all of this, an alien mind that is greater than ours and smart enough to have created all this, then what we've done is we've put a buffer between God and us, so there's less accountability there. And what that also does is, again, it gets back to this. Although God he's apparent from creation, sinful man chose to worship the creation rather than worship the creator. And worshiping extraterrestrial life would be just one more example of doing exactly that.
Yeah, well, we need to thank you so much for that, Danny, and also you, Casey. The show does last more than a half hour, but we're going to take a break now. And after the break, we're going to get back to discussing more about the UFOs, and particularly the implication of alien life on the question of intelligent design, since Casey works at the Discovery Institute, one of the bosses, and Discovery Institute is an intelligent design think tank. So after the break, we're going to come back and we're going to be discussing intelligent design a little bit. So please join us after the break. Thank you.
You are watching Trinity Channel.
Beyond the noise of media, culture, and confusion, an entire generation is still waiting to encounter the light of Christ. Many still live behind barriers of fear, persecution, and spiritual darkness. But God has opened new doors, doors once thought impossible to reach. Through the Aramaic Broadcasting Network, the gospel is now reaching nations across the earth.
Hurting hearts searching for truth, finding hope through the message of Christ. Through films, discipleship programs, and more.
The Abundant Z platform. Screens are becoming living pulpits. Day and night, the message of salvation continues moving across the nations.
Today, ABN's outreach extends across most of the world, carrying the light of Christ to millions of souls. But this growing mission requires continued support.
Production, technology, and faithful partners willing to stand in the gap.
That is why we invite you to stand with us.
Through your prayers, your partnership, and your support.
Because this is more than a media ministry.
It is a mission of salvation, reaching every nation, every home, and every heart. Together, let us continue the mission.
Until the whole world hears the message of salvation through the Lord Jesus Christ.
You are watching Trinity Channel.
Hi, I'm Don Deal, Director of Classical Apologetics at Norm Geisel International Ministries. You're here on Trinity Channel's show on spiritual warfare. And spiritual warfare isn't just always about demons, although we will get into that in a bit with Danny. But and I don't mean get into demons with you, Danny. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But we are discussing UFOs today and the possibility. This is all brought about because the U.S. government's been doing many hearings and releasing much information on UFOs. And the new movie Disclosure Day has gotten the topic as a hot topic where everybody's talking about it. And as I thought about the idea of intelligent extraterrestrials visiting us, my first thought was that if they visited a member of Gen Z first, then the first English word they would hear would be bro.
Actually, Don, it would be brah.
Bruh.
Bruh. Yeah, it's bruh now.
Sorry, I'm always a couple of years behind. Well, just before the break, we were discussing directed panspermia, among other things. And for those who don't know, once again, directed panspermia is the idea that aliens planted life here. And I believe Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of the double helix nature of DNA, was a proponent of the idea of directed panspermia, or at least of panspermia in general. What is it possible, panspermia, Casey?
Well, yeah, you gave a great little introduction, Don, to what panspermia is, and I think it's worth talking about this some more. Panspermia is the idea that the universe, just sort of through natural phenomena, is seeding life from one star system to another. And there's a lot of problems with that view, namely that it's very difficult to imagine how life could survive being transported through interstellar space for millions of years without being destroyed by interstellar radiation. And also, how would life survive the impact when it lands, when you have maybe life is on some comet or something like that, which smashes into a planet? Well, usually impact events are very, very high temperature chaotic events. They're going to destroy any life that's being transported. And so for that reason, a lot of folks have abandoned the idea of panspermia. Also, the likelihood of, say, some piece of rock that's flying at a random trajectory through space actually finding its way to a star system is insanely low. I mean, space is mostly empty, right? Space is not full of very much in terms of matter. So the likelihood of you eventually finding your way to a star system is very, very, very low. So a lot of folks have abandoned the idea of sort of natural or undirected panspermia in favor of what they call directed panspermia. And this really is aliens. Okay. This is aliens that are intentionally sending life out, trying to seed the universe with life through spaceships, basically sending life around. This would be sort of like the Prometheus version of life's history that Danny was talking about. And this idea has been promoted by a few serious scientists. Again, it's not like a lot of folks take this seriously, but one person who did take it seriously was Francis Crick. And he was the scientist who co-won the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA. Okay. And so this is very interesting. But what's interesting even more, I think, is why did Francis Crick appeal to directed panspermia? Well, one of the reasons why is because he actually was very honest, and he admitted that the likelihood of life evolving and arising naturally on Earth was very, very low. And this is actually what Francis Crick said. He said, let me try to find this quote here. I'm not finding it. Anyway, Francis Crick basically said that you would need to have a miracle for life to be able to get started on Earth, because it would be so unlikely. So he tried to basically push the question back by saying, well, maybe aliens seeded life on Earth. So look, these are basically arguments and explanations that are very, very hard to test scientifically and falsify. Because we can make all kinds of arguments that, okay, there's problems with being able to get enough fuel on an alien spaceship to be able to transport life from one star system to another. We can list all these technological obstacles, and people are just going to say, well, maybe aliens had very advanced technology that we haven't discovered yet that allowed them to transport life from one star system to another. These are really not, in my opinion, testable scientific claims. However, here's something that you can take to the bank. All right. If you want to appeal to aliens trying to produce and explain how life got here on Earth, there is something that aliens are never going to be able to explain. And that is the origin of the universe. Okay. When we talk about our universe, all the best scientific evidence shows that our universe had a beginning. Okay. Whether you believe in a billion-year-old universe or a universe that's only a few thousand years old, I personally believe in the standard billion-year-old universe. The universe had a beginning. Okay. And even the consensus view within physics and cosmology today is what is called the Big Bang model, which basically says that the universe began about 13 billion years ago. Now, when we think of a Big Bang, we think of an explosion. We think of an explosion, we think of something that's very chaotic. And we think, oh, a chaotic explosion is not going to produce all of the order and complexity that we see in the universe today. And that's absolutely right, okay? And that is why the Big Bang is really a misnomer. Really, when we talk about the mainstream cosmological view today, it's that the universe had a beginning and the universe has been finely tuned, and that the laws of nature are very, very carefully set up and very precisely where we can have things like galaxies, stars, planets, and complex life. And if the laws of nature were not exactly right, kind of like they call it like a Goldilocks universe, if the universe was not just right, we could not have a universe where life could exist. Okay. So the point of all this, Don, is that the universe had a beginning, and the laws of the universe are fine tuned to allow for life to exist. No alien being could ever create the universe, could ever get the universe going. No alien being could ever, fine tune the laws of nature. An alien, a UFO, an ET is going to be a being that lives inside of the universe. It's going to be subject to the laws of the universe. So no alien could ever explain how the universe got this beginning or how the universe became fine-tuned for life to exist. The only way to explain the beginning of the universe and the fine-tuning of the laws of nature is to appeal to a transcendent, external, supernatural, super powerful being that exists outside of the universe. Basically, we just described God, okay? So the only way to explain how the universe got started and how the universe became so carefully crafted so that life could exist, so the laws of nature would be finely tuned and just right so that life could be here, is to appeal to a super intelligent, super powerful, supernatural, divine being that exists outside of space and time. And again, that's usually the job description we give to God. So if you want to appeal to directed panspermia, there's a lot of very important aspects of the universe that you are not going to be able to explain through an alien. You need a transcendent being outside the universe.
Wow. I found your quote. Francis Crick said, an honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense, the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going. And I'd like to add something further on the question of aliens. Of course, if we say we can't have life evolve on Earth because of the difficulties, what is different about the planets the alien came from that life evolved there? And I think a more important question is a matter of time, because if you follow the standard Big Bang model, our solar system is a result of third generation stars novaing. That is, according to the standard Big Bang model, the initial universe was almost exclusively hydrogen and helium with a little bit of lithium in the beginning. You can't make life out of those three things. You need carbon, you need other things. You need heavier elements to have life. So you can't have a first generation. You can't have life evolve because the elements aren't available. You need generations of supernovas where the elements are fused together to make heavier elements. So you need billions of years before it could possibly arrange. So when was there time for the alien life, and how was their planet so different that it allowed them to evolve? I think that the people are simply letting their imagination count as an argument when they say that.
Yeah, Don, you alluded to a really good point there, that basically appealing to panspermia just pushes the question back. It kicks the can down the road. It never really explains how life got started in the first place. Where did the aliens come from? You're always going to have to trace back to a transcendent being, a mind, a God that exists outside the universe. And that is where life initially got started. If you don't have that initial source, you're appealing to an unevolved or to an evolved alien is just pushing the question back.
So you don't think life could have been carried here on an asteroid or a meteor? Say, for instance, the Vredefort meteor impact. You don't think life could have been kind of transported there, Casey?
Oh my gosh. What you're talking about right now is one of the oldest, largest meteorite impacts on Earth. It's in South Africa, and it exploded huge amounts of rock. It actually formed formations on the Earth that still exist today, some 2 billion years later in the Johannesburg area. This was an incredibly chaotic, dangerous, explosive event. You would not want to be you would not want to be here alive on Earth when that impact hit the planet. It would have destroyed any life that was anywhere near that impactor. So yeah, that is a good example, I think, as to why sort of undirected panspermia, the idea that life is just being transported around by comets, is not going to work. You're going to destroy any life when you try to bring it to a planet.
Having visited this impact site and gone over the hills like a ring of mountains, and you realize those aren't natural mountains. They're not giant mountains, but they're sizable hills. And then seeing some of the residue from the rock that was melted and then reformed, the metamorphic rock that came about as a result of that impact event, and having walked on and touched them next to a guy you probably never heard of named Simon, it was quite I'm going to get really corny here. It was quite an impactful event for me to see that.
Don, I wish you'd given me warning that we were going to talk about the Vredefort impact. I've got rocks that show exactly what you're talking about from Vredefort in my living room. I'll bring one out here and show you. You can see the granite and the melted glass. I mean, it's so cool. I'm a geologist. I'm going to nerd out for a second, but if there's another break, I'll bring a rock from that exact thing you're talking about.
We have one more break in about 10 minutes, and then we'll do the final section. So you'll have time to do that. I kind of thought a guy who got his PhD from South Africa might know a little bit about the Vredefort meteor impact.
You're making me nerd out here, Don. Absolutely. Yeah.
And Danny, this time I'm not going to ask you about what we were talking about.
appreciate that.
It is a beautiful place. It is a very beautiful place.
It is. And I'll send Danny's pictures next time I go next summer.
Not as beautiful as New Orleans, but you can have it.
I would say the food in New Orleans is, I prefer the food in New Orleans to the food in South Africa. But the food in South Africa is wonderful, but I prefer New Orleans. It's a different level of food. Casey, you've contended that if alien life exists, it would support intelligent design. You've talked a little bit about this. How would the discovery of even simple microbial life strengthen the design argument?
Yeah, I mean, this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, Don. At the very heart of life, any form of life that we can envision is going to be a language-based code that's carrying information to build those molecular machines that then make that high energy, highest order state that life always has to exist in. And the way that you convert that information into molecular machines is through a system of information processing that's very much like what we see in computers. So in our cells, we literally have, and actually not just in our cells, but even in the simplest quote unquote form of single-celled life that we have here on Earth, like bacteria, all cells use molecular machines that can read the information in the DNA, interpret and execute its commands and codes, and then produce an output, much like the way that computers will interpret and execute software commands and then give you an output. Okay. And of course, that output is molecular machines. So just to, keep this really brief, where in our experience do things like language-based code, computer-like information processing, where we're executing commands and codes, and machine-like structures come from? In all of our experience, these things have only one known cause, and that would be intelligence. And yet at the very heart of life, even the simplest one-celled form of life on our planet, like a bacterium, has language-based code, computer-like information processing, and molecular machines. So no matter what kind of life we're talking about, quote unquote, simple, there is no such thing as simple life, but simple or advanced, it's going to require intelligent design.
Interesting you say that. I wrote a journal article for a theological science type journal several years ago, and it was titled, "Does DNA equal God?" And I basically stole everything that Stephen wrote in his book, Signature in the Cell. Stephen Meyer wrote. I basically robbed most of his stuff, but I managed to add enough other stuff it would count as a publication of my own. But basically the idea is that the code encoded in DNA isn't like a language. It is a language. Whatever language has, it has grammar, it has letters, it has words, it has everything. It's a programming language to build life.
100% right. 100% agree. Yeah.
Now, in terms of my doctor friend who believes that aliens put life here, and like I said, let me back up a little bit. When you leave a religion you've been part of your whole life and you give it up, sometimes you're willing to grasp anything. I think G.K. Chesterton made that point. If when a person ceases to believe in God, it's not that they believe in nothing, it's that they'll believe anything, I believe is what he said, or something along that line. So Casey, is there any scenario in which alien intervention could be scientifically demonstrated as the source of life on Earth?
That's an interesting question. I mean, you're saying that aliens could be proved to be our creators, basically. How could we do that?
It's been shown in movies. Is there any way
it's been shown in movies? So look, if aliens showed up on Earth and said, "We are your creators," we would have to ask the question, well, how do we know you're telling the truth? Could there be some self-interest here in terms of you showing up and claiming that you are our creators? I can think of many Star Trek episodes that had malevolent aliens that were posing as friendly, benevolent beings to basically deceive the inhabitants of some planet to get something out of them. Okay. So This is a script that we've seen before. So, I mean, I'm not expecting any of this to happen, by the way. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I'm certainly not banking on this happening tomorrow. But I mean, if aliens were to show up and to claim that we are your creators, I think we would have to then start evaluating whether or not we think these aliens are actually telling the truth and are trustworthy. And to be honest with you, this is probably my biggest gripe with the Disclosure Day movie. And again, I'm probably giving a little bit too much away here, but he basically portrays Steven Spielberg basically portrays the aliens in that movie as completely friendly and benevolent beings. Okay. And I'm not a ufologist. I'm not an expert in this, but I know that Steven Spielberg said that, his movie was supposed to be more truth than fiction. And he really wanted people to think, this is a movie about the real world or what could actually happen. This is not just a fantastical story. Okay. And so, okay, fine. He's allowed to do that. And if he wants to believe in all the alien UFO lore, he's allowed to do that. But what he did is he actually cherry picked from UFO lore these stories of aliens being friendly, benevolent beings. But there's a whole other side of UFO lore. I'm not saying I necessarily believe in this or agree with any of this, but I'm just saying it's out there. There's a whole major aspect of UFO lore and people telling stories about encounters with aliens where they are not benevolent beings. They are highly malevolent. They are evil intentioned. Okay. And so in telling a story about, UFOs, Steven Spielberg basically took a side. Okay. He chose to tell a story where the aliens are entirely friendly and benevolent being. And he ignored all the folks, out there who were saying, no, actually these beings are malevolent or evil or whatever you want to call them. And again, I'm not saying I believe in this stuff. I'm just saying it's very interesting that Steven Spielberg took a side in that UFO lore debate as to whether or not aliens really are friendly or not. And we would have to decide that question for ourselves if aliens were to show up and start telling us that they are our creators.
You remind me of one of my Twilight Zone favorite episodes, Casey. It's called To Serve Man.
To Serve Man, my favorite. That's my favorite. Oh my gosh. I love that episode. Yes. Tell us about that episode, Don.
The aliens come and they're our benefactors and they have their own language and their own books and everything. And the humans are trying to translate their language. And the aliens are starting to put humans on spaceships to take them to their enlightened, better life to come on the alien planet. And one of the guys managed to translate only the book title at the beginning, and it says To Serve Man. And he thinks the rest of the book must be about how they can serve us. And then it turns out at the very end, the little catch, the little Twilight Zone twist is it's a cookbook.
The guy's getting on the plane to go back to the plane. He says, "It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook." What a great line.
Yeah, so that was not a benevolent alien show for sure.
But that's a good point, though. If aliens show up, we would have to decide: do we trust them or not? Do we believe what they're actually saying?
And I would say from the atheistic evolutionist point, and I say that because we know from BioLogos and others, there's some Christians who affirm evolution. From the atheistic evolutionary viewpoint, for me, if the purpose of evolution is to survive and procreate, why would we trust any creature that may benefit through our destruction? Their purpose of existence is only to survive and procreate. And if they can do that better by getting rid of us, why would we think that they would come here with goodness in their heart? I don't even know what goodness means to an atheist beyond whatever benefits them personally. Have you ever had that kind of conversation, Danny, with an atheist about what goodness is and where it comes from?
As a matter, yeah, I've had that conversation with a lot of different people, and I have, both you and I have gotten masters in Christian apologetics, and of all of the different apologetics arguments, I typically have always leaned on the moral argument because from a humanist viewpoint, and I tend to agree with Nietzsche that if there is no God, then there is no right and wrong beyond what is right and wrong for me at a moment. And I've had probably the most success in getting people to at least acknowledge the possibility of the existence of a God from the just simple fact that there is human morality. And I used to, when I was dealing with youth, I used to always ask the question, if I walk up to a street corner and there's a little old lady on the street corner, does it make a difference whether I help her across the street or beat her to death with a can of green beans? Now, I've used green beans because that's far more comical than a hammer, but everybody agrees that obviously to beat somebody to death for no reason other than my own entertainment would be horrific. And my question is why? And when you're dealing with an atheist or somebody who denies the existence of any kind of God, ultimately they can't ever get to that why. There's no reason why one act should be better than another. And yet people know in their hearts that there is something wrong, that there is one better than another. And so, when you're talking to somebody who wants to believe that there is no God or wants to argue that there is no God, and yet they instinctively know in their hearts that there is, they're left with no other. They have to examine themselves and come to some acceptance of why they know that there is a right and that there is a wrong. Because as you alluded to just a second ago, Don, if there is no God, then survival of the fittest is the only right. And the idea that we should, again, if procreation is what it's all about, then it should behoove every man to fertilize every woman possible, even if by force. Now, again, as I say that, this is a reprehensible concept. Why is it a reprehensible concept? Because there is a God. So I just, we were talking kind of, as we started this whole discussion, we were kind of referencing the Bible. And I think one of the reasons we have such a problem with the idea of biblical teachings and science, and specifically in this case, the possibility that there is extraterrestrial life. The Bible was never written as a science book. Okay, the Bible, we're a Greek society. We always we're asking the how questions. We want to look behind the curtain and find out how things work. The Bible was never really written to answer those kind of questions. The Bible was written to answer the why questions. And we're talking about how the universe came into existence and all of the molecular characteristics and all of these things. The Bible just simply says, in the beginning, God. God doesn't go into great detail as to how he did all. I mean, we get a brief explanation in Genesis, but it is considering the vastness of the universe, the complexity of life, that's a really brief description. God doesn't spend a lot of time explaining how he did it. His what he's wanting us to know is that he did it, and that we give him credit for it, and that it is to his glory versus us. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with us trying to better understand the universe. But at the end of the day, we all really do have to accept that none of us will ever be smart enough to figure all of this out. And the universe will always have a great level of mystery to us because we aren't God. But back to your moral question. No, if you're an atheist, you got no solid ground for moral other than, well, everybody thinks it's that way.
One of the things that struck me as being a conflict in my mind on almost all these happy, kind, benevolent alien movies are the idea that they share a moral framework with us, that somehow what we have come to understand as right or wrong is what they would think was right or wrong, that helping others would be right or wrong. And if evolution doesn't provide a satisfactory explanation on Earth, why would it on a different planet? Why would they think benevolence is good? I know the whole benevolence is what was programmed into us through our ancestors who were more benevolent and survived at a greater rate than those who were selfish and didn't. But that doesn't tell me why I should be benevolent or share. If Elon Musk wants to be the richest guy on Earth, and I see so many complaints about his riches, why should he care about what they say as an individual? Because just because evolution didn't program that gene into him of benevolence that it did to the rest of us, and I'm not saying it didn't, or not saying that he doesn't have benevolence, but I'm saying their arguments fail if they say it's what evolution produced, and then they're saying he's really wrong not to share, because that's just simply my molecules don't like your molecule argument, and there's nothing intellectually compelling about that argument. We're gonna take a quick break here. We've been discussing UFOs. We're going to take a small break. Please consider calling the number or going to the QR code or going to ABN Sat. Consider supporting this network as we attempt to bring the gospel and gospel-centered programs. Today, we're discussing UFOs with Dr. Casey Luskin and Dr. Danny Burnham. We're going to take a short break so Casey can show us, we can do some show and tell after the break. So please join us after the break.
You are watching Trinity Channel.
In a world filled with darkness, millions are still waiting to hear the name of Jesus for the very first time. Today, the 1040 window remains the most unreached region on Earth.
A place where fear and persecution have kept countless souls isolated from the gospel. But the walls are coming down. Through social media, streaming platforms, and powerful cinematic productions, ABN has become a church without walls.
Carrying the love of Jesus beyond borders, beyond restrictions, and directly into homes and hearts.
Today, ABN's digital reach extends to nearly 95% of the world's population. To the persecuted, we bring kindness.
To the lost, we bring light. To the unreached, we bring the truth of the gospel.
But this mission comes with a cost. As the harvest grows, so does the need for technology, production, and global outreach. Yet we refuse to retreat. This is not just a financial need. This is a lifeline to the unreached.
Your support helps carry the gospel where missionaries cannot go.
Through screens, media, and the power of God's word.
Join us on the frontier. Together, let us finish the mission.
You are watching Trinity Channel.
Hi, I'm Don Deal, the Director of Classical Apologetics at Norm Geis International Ministries. I have with me Dr. Danny Burnham of First Baptist Church, Titusville, and Dr. Casey Luskin of the Discovery Institute. And I had a brief laugh there as I saw the show and tell portion of the program. Casey's going to talk us a little bit about the Rutherford Crater in South Africa. Just to give you a comparison, many people in America have seen the meteor crater in Arizona. Familiar seeing the pictures of it. To give you a comparison in size, the diameter of the crater in Arizona is about 3/4 of a mile. The diameter of the crater in South Africa is 190 miles. The depth of the meteor that struck in Arizona is about 570 feet, and the depth of the meteor that struck South Africa is several miles deep. Just to give you an idea, they think that the impact object in Arizona was about 50 meters or about 160 foot wide. The one in South Africa was a mountain that hit the earth. There's a huge difference in the impact craters, and you don't even notice. You just see a hill range, and you don't even realize that you're in the middle of a crater. I mean, 190-mile diameter. And I believe Casey, being a geologist, knows a bit more about it than I do. So please, Casey, tell us what you got there.
Actually, you just gave a really nice introduction there, Don. What I'll show actually is a rock that I collected at the Fredford Dome. And you can see in this rock, there's kind of this dark zone and this lighter zone. So what's going on here actually tells you the story of what happened when that giant mountain-sized asteroid hit the Earth at the Fredford Dome, and what happened next. What happened next was it hit a huge body of granite, okay? And so this lighter part up here, this is basically just pink granite, okay? And it's fairly undisturbed, undeformed. If you were to look at it in a microscope, it would have the classic minerals you find in granite like quartz, biotite, plagioclase, feldspar, et cetera, okay? Or that might actually be orthoclase. But anyway, you get the point. It's just sort of normal granite. But then what's this dark stuff down here? This is actually volcanic glass. So the idea is that when this giant asteroid hit the Earth, it impacted so hard that it immediately melted the granite and turned it to glass. And then there are chunks of sort of undisturbed granite that didn't get melted that ended up getting sort of solidified within the glass. And so you can go there and you can find this dark material, this glass, and then you get these chunks of undisturbed granite that are kind of like floating around in the liquid glass, and then everything just kind of solidifies. And it's really fascinating. You can see just the immense power of this impact to literally destroy the granite, melt it completely, turn it to liquid, which then crystallized so quickly it formed a type of volcanic glass. So the question is, if this is what an impactor can do to granite, imagine what it can do to life. It's not going to be easy to imagine how life is going to survive an impact of an asteroid hitting another planet. It's going to be a very, very dangerous and hostile event.
Yeah, I was just checking. Okay, here we go. The Brennerford asteroid impact released roughly 58 billion times more energy than the Hiroshima atomic bomb.
That's all?
Yeah, so Casey, if that asteroid was carrying a microbe, a single cell trapped within, protected from intergalactic radiation, not UV, but whatever kind, various kinds of radiation that can destroy life, what would have happened to that life when it hit the Earth?
Well, there's kind of a catch-22 situation here. According to panspermia proponents, maybe if you had life traveling on little tiny specks of dust or little tiny particles, they could possibly, survive the impact on those. The problem is that if you're traveling on a speck of dust or you're traveling on a tiny little, piece of rock, you're not going to have any insulation from all the interstellar radiation, and the life is going to get killed by cosmic rays. Okay. So on the other side of the coin, you can put life in a giant meteorite, a giant asteroid. Maybe there it's going to get protected from the radiation. But the problem is now when that thing hits the planet, that is going to cause so much heat and energy, 58 billion times the amount of energy of Hiroshima for, a modest sized, mountain sized asteroid. Okay. Now you're destroying any life when it impacts. So there's kind of no way to avoid this problem, whether it's a small vehicle for traveling the life around through the cosmos or a large vehicle. Either way, it's not working. And, maybe there's a Goldilocks zone where it's just right, but now it's sounding very directed, purposeful, teleological, and you're not, allowing natural blind mechanisms to do the job anymore for you.
I know when I was researching the idea of panspermia, when I read Rare Earth and when I read We Are Not Alone, that got me curious, and I started researching. And just quickly, some of the things that go against the microscopic on being on dust particle, life being carried on dust particle is, number one, if the life has any sort of fluid, then it would boil off because of the near vacuum of space. So that isn't very helpful for life. Extreme temperatures, extreme cold, extreme heat as it transitions from near to away from a sun. The temperature extremes are incredible. And the radiation, as Casey mentioned, cosmic rays, solar flares, ultraviolet radiation. The reason we don't get killed by that sort of stuff is because we have the Earth's magnetic field. Anything like that, the radiation would quickly, and this is not slowly, would quickly destroy any DNA or any information-bearing molecules that would keep allow that cell to reproduce. And of course, the final thing is lack of resources. How would it continue to live? How would it be formed in the first place? If it's part of a planet that was exploded, then that's a lot of energy that probably would kill all life. So go ahead.
Yeah, you're making a lot of great points here. I'll just say on the last point, they have discovered bacterial spores, which they think can go dormant for maybe even millions of years. So I'm not saying this is proven yet, but maybe life can survive for a long period of time. But again, you're exactly right. That's under Earth conditions, under hostile conditions where there's radiation in space, extreme temperatures, hot, cold, etc. I think all bets are off.
Okay, well, let me get Danny back into this for spaceships this time. Danny, you ready to talk about spaceships?
Why not?
Ezekiel.
Yes.
He described a wheel within a wheel, which in the 1974 book, The Spaceships of Ezekiel by NASA engineer Joseph Blumrich, he said that that was an ancient spaceship that had a spherical omnidirectional wheel system for traversing varied terrain. The firmament and dome described as a metallic canopy or dome structure protecting the entities inside. The four living creatures, the cherubim, were foundational structure housing the propulsion mechanisms with helicopter-like rotary wings. The noise of the wings is just like you hear a jet aircraft take off or a helicopter, and the landing gear and heat would cause a great cloud with fire flashing forth continually, which is just what Ezekiel described. Is there any reason not to think that Ezekiel saw an alien spaceship, Danny?
Well, I think he hit it right on the head. That must exactly be what it is. There is always a danger in reading scripture out of context. Parts of Ezekiel is not technically considered to be apocryphal literature. It's kind of what we classify as proto-apocryphal, but it does have a lot of apocryphal characteristics to it. And in the same way that we read poetry and prose differently, we don't read poetry as being literal. We understand that it is full of imagery. Well, the same thing in apocryphal literature. What the vision in Ezekiel 1 was not to give a vision of something that Ezekiel actually saw. Because if you really start to read it, it is unbelievably symbolic. And the wheel references, particularly the wheels covered with eyes. You got wheels covered with eyes, and the wheels that can go in any direction at any time are thought by most scholars to represent God's omnipresence and omniscience. This was all to represent the glory of God and the awesomeness of God, but it was never written to be thought of as literal. And I don't see any evidence that would support the idea that this was an alien visit thousands of years ago. Now, and again, I always go back to, as we've been having this discussion, I keep going back to the same question. Why is it so important for us to somehow attribute everything to an alien species? Why would it be, again, just looking at Ezekiel, why would it be preferable for us to look at Ezekiel's vision as a vision of an alien species as opposed to imagery of the one true God of the universe? Why is it that we, as a species, have this feeling that we have to do this? We have to create a creator for ourselves that is less than the one true God. Why is this so important for us to do? And I can't help but wonder if we're not trying to come up with something that gives us far less accountability. If it is an alien species and they are some type of mortal temporal being, then they are far more, well, it depends on the movie, the alien movie you watch. Because in a lot of the alien movies, even those that are malevolent ones that are trying to kill us, we ultimately kill them. That's how the movie's supposed to end. War of the Worlds, they're destroying us until they catch a cold. So there's always something about them that makes them defeatable. However, if Ezekiel is having a vision, is shown a vision of God, a being that is far above us, that can't be conquered, to whom that we are all accountable. But truthfully, I could see why somebody who's trying to get away from the idea of there being a God would look at Ezekiel and say, yes, this must be aliens, because if the vision we see of God in Ezekiel 1 is even remotely a representation of the one true God, then he is a being to whom we must all bow.
I would like to say, I think you said apocryphal, and I think you meant apocalyptic.
Yeah, apocalyptic. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, because I know how the comments go when people watch these and they find one thing and they say, well, I'll never listen to Danny again because he said a wrong word.
I do apologize. I did misspeak.
I just want to get out there. Well, Casey, you've argued that the existence of humanoid aliens would be significant, especially significant. Why would human-like extraterrestrials point to a common designer rather than evolution's blind forces?
Yeah, it's a great question there, Don. So let's say, very hypothetically, this fantastical scenario that gray humanoid aliens land on the White House lawn. I'm not expecting that to happen, but if it did happen, I think it would be the ultimate disproof of Darwinism. Okay. So the stereotypical gray humanoid alien would be, we've seen it all in the movies, would have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and a head. People would recognize this as having a basic humanoid body plan. Now, some people are going to be tempted to say that we evolved these biological similarities independently, kind of like the Star Trek version of aliens where they always look just like we do. Evolutionary biologists call this convergent evolution. But the irony is that under an evolutionary view, the existence of the independent evolution of another organism with a body plan just like ours is incredibly improbable. So if you go according to what mainstream evolutionary biology says, Darwinian evolution is supposed to be blind and unguided. And this means that the likelihood of evolution on another planet independently generating humanoid life like us is infinitely small. And in fact, as I did research into this, I found that other scientists have recognized this point. The University of Chicago paleontologist David Raup, who passed away a few years ago, he was writing about ET life. And he said, quote, the majority of evolutionary biologists find the chance of an independent evolution of a recognizably humanoid creature to be essentially nil. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the well-known physicist who's an agnostic, he had an op-ed in the New York Times a few weeks ago talking about this whole alien disclosure stuff. And in that op-ed, he actually said that if there was, quote, humanoid aliens, this would, quote, shock him because it would be violating everything we know about biodiversity. Those are his words. So why would the existence of humanoid aliens shock him? Well, it's because, again, it's extremely unlikely to independently evolve the same basic humanoid body plan. So if there is something that's so similar to us, this would imply a common link, a common designer. And we know from our experience with intelligent agents that they regularly reuse parts that work in different systems. Engineers will reuse wheels on both cars and airplanes, or they'll reuse keyboards on tablets and cell phones. And when we see a high degree of similarity, ultimately that suggests a common intelligent designer, not Darwinian evolution. So if we do in fact find humanoid gray aliens, I think that points to common design much more than it points to, just sort of a blind unguided, independent chance that we all stumbled upon the same body plan.
Yeah, I think the late Harvard geologist and evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould would agree with you. He always made the point in his books that life is contingent on Earth, and that it could have been much different. And the phrase the thought experiment he said if we rewound the tape of life, the story of life, and started it over again, and started from the origin of life and hit play again, he said the resulting evolutionary tree would look completely different, meaning humans and other specific species might never evolve. And he said that part of his understanding of evolution, of which I assume as a Harvard-trained scientist with a couple of PhDs, he would know what he's talking about. Number one, evolution is contingent, depending on the conditions and the random mutations bringing up life forms. There's radical divergence. If you played the same tape 10 million times, you get 10 million from the same starting point, you get 10 million differences, because it's all based on random chance and mutations. And humanity is his final point. Humanity has never been inevitable to happen on Earth. The idea that it would happen somewhere else is just taking the mathematically impossible. And yeah, it's for me, when people use that as an argument against my faith, I see it as a massive argument from ignorance or massive argument from silence, which are logical fallacies. Basically, those fallacies say, if you can't prove me wrong, I must be right. And how could I prove them wrong that there's no other aliens? I mean, that's one of those things. I don't have the access to the materials to test that. Let me get this one question to you before we're getting kind of short on time here. And I do appreciate your patience, Casey, and your presence. And Danny, thank you for putting up with a topic that you probably wouldn't have asked for to start with. But I think you're starting to see, Danny, that every topic is ultimately theological in some way.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Casey, many UFO enthusiasts believe advanced extraterrestrials are already visiting Earth. Oh, I already asked you that one. I got my questions mixed up.
No, I don't think you did.
Okay, maybe maybe not. Many UFO enthusiasts believe advanced extraterrestrials are already visiting Earth. What scientific obstacles make interstellar travel much more difficult than most people realize? Yeah, I haven't asked that one yet. You're right. So why can't they just simply get into their George Jetson speeder and or their Luke Skywalker X-wing fighter and fly to Earth? Why not, Casey?
So first of all, as far as we know, about everything we know about physics tells us that there is what is called a universal speed limit, and that is the speed of light. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. That means it's going to take very long periods of time to get from one star system to another. Now, granted, there are some star systems that are not that far away. Maybe you could go in, 30 to 40 years at the speed of light, but we don't know, if you're talking about traveling large interstellar distances, light is the speed limit. Now, there's a much bigger problem, though, and that is getting the right fuel to be able to travel that far versus the weight of the spacecraft, okay? Basically, the more fuel you use to travel through space, the more weight there's going to be. So somehow you'd have to have a source of fuel that weighs almost nothing to be able to travel through space through long distance of time, distances. Otherwise, you just can't do it. There's also something called the interstellar dust bomb problem, and that is that space is not completely empty. When a ship travels at a significant fraction of the speed of light, then if you hit a single tiny microscopic grain of dust, that would release enough energy to destroy your ship. And then, of course, there's also cosmic radiation. If you're traveling through space, interstellar space is full of these high energy cosmic rays that would degrade electronics on the spacecraft and any kind of DNA. But again, if you want to shield your spacecraft, it's going to become so heavy that, again, it's going to be very difficult for it to travel that far. Now, I can tell you right now that as soon as you make these arguments, your friends who are UFO fanatics are going to say, well, maybe the aliens discovered technology that's beyond what we know of today. Okay. And on that point, what can you say? It's kind of like when you're saying they make these unfalsifiable arguments. We cannot falsify their argument that there could be unknown laws of physics or, unknown, yet to be discovered science that will solve all these problems. Maybe they will, but I'm just going off of the science that we know of today. The science we know of today makes it very difficult to imagine how you could travel very long distances through interstellar space without basically degrading the spacecraft or degrading the inhabitants of that spacecraft and making it physically possible.
I did a quick check to see how much energy those pebbles in space would have, Casey. A 1 gram pebble, if you struck it and your spaceship was able to go 98% of the speed of light, then it would have 3.6 times 10 to the 15th joules of kinetic energy. In other words, approximately 86 kilotons of TNT in a 1 gram pebble. That's pretty significant.
86 kiloton nuclear weapon from a little tiny rock in space. Yeah.
Yes. If it's bigger, if it's a 10 gram, then you 10 times the power, 860 kiloton of force would hit the spaceship. And of course, if it's 100 grams, which is a pebble still, that's about 8.6 megatons of TNT. So it looks like you're probably correct, Casey. It would be very difficult. And I do have friends that believe that they've seen and even communicated with UFOs. And I'm very respectful because you can't argue someone's personal experience. You can believe yourself certain things happen, but you certainly can't argue with them because you weren't there. They may have seen something, and maybe if you were there, you could have explained it, but you weren't. And so I'm respectful of them, and I understand what they believe. I don't think it's accurate, but I just one extra thing I think people should I wish people would check out on YouTube. There's a channel called the Corridor Crew. The Corridor Crew are a team of special effects specialists who have a YouTube channel, and they have gone over the various UFO videos that have been released as evidence of spaceships doing incredible things. And some of them had them laughing and almost in tears that were obviously effects from camera lenses and other parts of the machinery. When they say, for instance, there's like an object going 400 miles an hour that way. Well, if your jet's going 400 miles an hour that way, then a bird's flying past, looks like it's going 400, things like that. They did not, and they've made multiple videos looking at UFO, analyzing UFO videos. And I've not seen one of them where they could not find a very good and rational and believable explanation of what was going on. From individuals, it was frequently special effects. People would upload videos to the internet of UFOs, and they would tell you how they made it. But from the government ones, it was the vast majority were simple things that happen when you have a digital camera with an aperture of a certain type and size. It has certain artifacts, and these people were thinking that was an actual object. So no strong enough evidence to convince me. I'm not saying couldn't be. Obviously, as Danny says, we should be humble enough to recognize we don't know everything about the universe. But before we go, and I very much do appreciate you coming on, Casey. I know how busy you are. For the people who want to know more about you and what you do, how can they find you?
Sure. Well, you can go to our main news website, which is scienceandculture.com. That's scienceandculture.com. Also, Discovery Institute's intelligent design program is just discovery.org/ID. And that's a great place to get more information. In fact, you mentioned at the long time ago in this conversation today, Don, great animations of molecular machines. Mm-hmm. We have quite a few of those on our YouTube channel. You can go to our Discovery Institute Science channel on YouTube and find some great animations of molecular machines to learn more about the science that shows intelligent design.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Casey, for being here and helping our audience to understand a little bit more about the challenges that a UFO would have coming here, and also our UAP, would have coming here, and also the difficulty of life being planted here, either purposely or accidentally from another solar system. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today, and we hope to get you back on again someday to talk about other interesting topics.
Thank you, Don and Danny. Great to meet you. And I remember last year we talked about human chimp genetic similarities. That was fun. So let's do it again sometime. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Danny, thank you so much for being here. And I'll see you in a couple hours with 1,000 screaming kids.
See you in a few.
All right. For our audience, I'm Dr. Don Deal. This is Dr. Danny Burnham with me, and Dr. Casey Luskin's our special guest today. We've been discussing UFOs from a Christian perspective and a scientific, in Casey's case, a scientific perspective. So we thank you for watching us today. We ask your support for ABN's series of networks as they bring the gospel and the gospel messages around the world. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. Good night.
You are watching Trinity Channel.
In a world full of noise, people are still searching for peace.
في وسط تعب هذا العالم، ما زالت القلوب تبحث عن السلام الحقيقي.
हर इंसान के दिल में शांति की प्यास होती है।
真正的平安不是来自世界。
صلح واقعی از قلب انسان آغاز می شود. ریختینی صلح د انسان لزر چخه پیلیجی.
La paix commence à l'intérieur du cœur.
दिल की हकीकी सुकून सिर्फ खुदा से मिलती है।
Damai sejati dimulai dari hati. Salama ta gaskiya tana zuwa daga zuciya.
Gerçek huzur insanın kalbinde başlar.